Yes, what has happened is that payments have been delayed, but it's not as if they've not been made. So, what the solar facility does is that it would pay the investors, the the investors would buy the guarantee and the guarantee would pay them for decentralized solar in Africa. This is not about large solar farms. This is about decentralized solar, uh, solar mini grids, solar rooftops, and Ellen, who is a valued partner, uh, the vast amount of investments are in large solar, and we are hoping that this would encourage them to come into decentralized solar as well. The At the heart of it, once the repayment is made to the investor, they pay back the guarantee. So it becomes a form of an interest free loan for the duration of the delay in payment. But the GSF, the Global Solar Facility, is not just about financial assistance. It also, there are pieces of it which strengthen the regulatory framework, which promote project development and obviously mitigates risks. We also have a component here which looks at providing the technical assistance needed for the project preparatory work. This, we hope, would enable the entire ecosystem to come together. Now, as you have noticed, the amount of money there is very small. As I said, what I hope is that this will create leverage. As organizations feel more comfortable in and have the confidence to invest in decentralized solar projects, this would lead to the opening of gates of investments. So, directly, we expect, based on experiences we've had with guarantees and other markets, that the this would lead to approximately $1.4 billion worth of investments. But informally, as the gates open, as we will go ahead, we are looking for increases in investment going up to possibly three times or four times in the over the next 4 or 5 years. Now, to operationalize this, obviously we are looking at people, countries, organizations who can make grants. And I'm delighted that Bloomberg Philanthropies is here with us. They are part of the initial people who have the confidence in the facility and are putting in their money into the facility. Thank you very, very much. Right, that's receiving the money. How are we spending the money? There, the first project that we have focused on is, with the help of the MIGA, we identified Nuru Energy in the Democratic Republic of Congo, which is a series of mini grids, and are providing insurance capital to them because they are buying insurance from MIGA. That insurance amount makes the projects, it tilts the viability of the project. What we are hoping is this would make it more viable. So I'm delighted that the Global Solar Facility's first investment would be, as far as we are concerned, in the Nuru project. Actually, it's happening even before the GSF is formed. So, we'll have to bend ourselves, find, uh, catch the ear by turning our head around and so on. But this, we hope, before the end of this calendar year, that means in the next few days, we hope to be able to provide the resources that are needed for the insurance to happen. There are other investors as well. The government of India has said that they would be an anchor investor. As I said earlier, I'm delighted that Bloomberg Philanthropies is an anchor investor. Similarly, various countries and other philanthropies have also announced their intention to be anchor investors. We look at making the GESF, the Global Solar Facility, agile, replicable, scalable. This means that only then will it have the kind of demonstration effect that is needed to have the large scale impact that we need. We are therefore also looking at having a private sector investor as the investment agency for this global solar facility. We don't look at the International Solar Alliance managing this fund. What do we know about how do you get monies? What do we know about where is the monies needed? The amount of time that we spent with Marcus must be thinking, my God, these guys are weird. They spent so much money on it. But I think the first projects, you'll have to excuse us, we need to be educated. But after this, we hope this can run on private sector lines. We look forward that we would expand. Nuru is the first project, but what is your goal? 5 million people? This is the kind of impact we want to have. This is the kind of difference that the Global Solar Facility would like to make. Uh, you know, you are going into a market which is difficult. DRC has what, 20% electrification, something of that sort? And therefore, adding 5 billion people to it would make a huge difference. May I welcome each one of you here, and I want to thank each one of our partners for making this possible. Thank you all very, very much.
Thank you, sir, for setting such a great context. Let me now invite Mr. Alain from Africa 50. But before I invite him, let me give you a brief on what Africa 50 is doing in the continent. Africa 50 is an infrastructure investment platform that contributes to Africa's growth by developing and investing in bankable pipeline of projects. Mr. Len is the CEO of Africa 50, like I just said, and he has been a specialist in financing, having worked in the World Bank Group and headed the infrastructure ventures of IFC as well. So the floor is all yours, Mr. Len.
Yes, absolutely. Well, thank you, DG Ajay, my good friend, and Pragya. I think you've said many of the things that I wanted to say, but I try to add a few things. I'm delighted to be here. This is a great event, and indeed, we may be talking about small amounts of monies, but the leverage effect will make sure that we have big impact. I represent Africa 50. Just to add to what Fadia has said, we are owned by 31 African countries so far. Soon there will be 33 African countries, but I won't be able to disclose them today, but very soon. And the African Development Bank is also one of our owners, and then also two African central banks. The beauty of this structure is that those public shareholders have given us the mandate to operate commercially, because there's now a consensus that the private sector capital is what will make a real difference. The public sector capital and philanthropy would act as catalyst to leverage those limited funds to make sure that we can channel big amounts of private capital in emerging market and in these developing countries, many African countries would qualify. In fact, this is a conversation which is happening even here at COP. I was sitting and participating, not just sitting in an event chaired by Ambassador Al Saudi for COP, Majid. And then there were people like BlackRock, Larry Fink was there, Jim Corton, and we are talking about the reform of the NDBs, including the World Bank. MIGA is already doing that. Essentially doing, you have to focus on catalyzing private capital into emerging market in Africa as opposed to focusing on lending money. So it's about catalyzing, finding ways to mitigate the risk so that the private sector will be comfortable coming in. This is the kind of things that are important. Now, we at Africa 50, we're covering 7 sectors: power, transport, ICT, health, education, fintech, and then midstream gas. So midstream gas is also part of the sectors that we are covering because we want a balanced energy mix as we pursue a climate target. But for us, the portfolio that we have today of investment the biggest part of the portfolio is in energy because energy is so important. And within the energy space, the biggest component is renewables. This is what we do at Africa 50. We have a large portfolio of renewables, and indeed, this shows our commitment as a continent to pursuing our climate target, to trying very hard to meet our climate target with a balanced energy mix. So at Africa 50, owned by 31 African countries, the African Development Bank and two central banks, we show the way by seeing up by demonstrating that our portfolio is mostly renewables, at least for the energy space. Now, I should be honest, is that in our portfolio, we focus mostly on grid connected as a power project, renewable project. We have invested in 400 megawatt solar in Egypt, Bemban, delivering power, renewable power to the population and businesses. And indeed, we have big impact and we're also making returns. And this is totally fine. We have a double bottom line, impact and returns. And there's nothing wrong about that. In fact, we have to promote that so that we can catalyze more private investment. We have other renewables projects, including hydro. They're all relatively large projects, grid connected. And I fundamentally believe that to reach the goal of universal access to electricity to all Africans, indeed, to all the population of the world, we will have grid connected, but we're also going to have off grid. And this is so important. Mini grid, uh, solar home system, rooftop solars. This is something that we need to figure out a way to do at scale. We at Africa 50, we tried so far to do some of those, but we have at this point not succeeded because there are constraints. And those constraints were identified by my colleagues from ISA. The payment risk when you have this distributed solar, the small size of the project, at least at the beginning, and then we can expand. The fact that not all of these projects today are 100% commercial. You have to think about blending. You have to think about blending to make sure that you're able to expand these things significantly. Now, when Ajay and Pragya, Anita, Harsh told us about this facility, I said, look, you're addressing the right issues that have prevented us to get into this space. We are looking at this space. We know this space, especially in our continent. So if you come up with a facility the way you've designed it, and I added something which we continue to work. I added it has to be user friendly. It has to be something that is result oriented. I don't want to spend 2 years talking about structuring a deal. It has to be something that the market can use. So in the design of the facility, we are giving our inputs to RJ and the team to make sure that it is attractive for investors because at the end of the day, what we want is impact. So this is being taken care of. And I think speed of implementation, there's a sense of urgency. Folks, we cannot be spending too much time thinking through trying to reach perfection. If it's good enough, I argue, let's do it because, the biggest cost of energy is no energy. People who are thinking about spending 2 years to have the perfect energy. In the meantime, folks are not going to die. They will use whatever they can find in terms of energy. So, Africa 50, our mantra is if it's good enough, do it. Speed up implementation. So I think so all in all, I think this is fantastic initiative. I'm glad that my colleagues from MIGA, I used to be at IFC. I spent 17 years at IFC and used to work with, well, we're still working with MIGA. Bloomberg Philanthropies, we actually met some of your folks. And so very good organizations. So this public-private partnership with a commercial mandate, I'm extremely bullish about what we can do together. And I want to thank the ISA team to have thought about this product starting in Africa and expanding globally. We'll do whatever we can to support because this is such an important product. Thank you very much. Uh, okay, I'd like to say that my colleague Raza Asdani, Managing Director for Africa 50 Project Finance, is also here. I have to leave, I'm sorry, and Raza will be here. He will answer all of the questions for Africa 50, and also JP, Senior Director for Fundraising and Investors Relations is here, and then my Chief of Staff, Fleur, is here, so we're coming here in force just to support the event. Thank you. Yes, sorry.
I am really delighted.
Okay, thank you, Ajay. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. So you.
Thank you, Mr. Anil. I think before we move to the formal handshake and announcement of the Nuru project, maybe we can give you a brief on what the global solar facility looks like. And we've got Mr. Harsh Singhal here, who's been supporting us in operationalizing the facility on ground. So, Harsh, can I invite you to present on the global solar facility?
Good morning, everyone. I'm delighted to be presenting the layout of the global solar facility to all of you. So essentially, as DG sir mentioned, there was a lot of consultation which was done while designing the global solar facility. So essentially, there are three components of this facility. The first one being, which is the main component, which is around payment guarantee. And when I say payment guarantee, it could take different forms and shapes. Like Hello mentioned, uh, there are some projects which need liquidity support. There are some projects which need where you actually could work with local banks and help them support lots of projects. So that's how you create a lot more leverage. So that is the payment guarantee component. So in the beginning, we are targeting it to be a $50 million component. The second is the insurance fund, and that's one of the key issues which was identified is that in Africa the projects really suffer because the cost competitive insurance is not available. Now, of course, it will take years to build an insurance company which could take care of those risks. So what we are coming out is with a facility which provides soft loans that take care of the insurance premium cost to some extent for the project. So then in that way, you are incentivizing the projects to take the right insurance. And then it will help unlock some of the insurance which is not being taken or it's not being priced properly in the African markets. And then finally is the investment fund, which basically comprises of two parts. One is the TA component, which is essentially to help develop pipeline for projects and help develop regulatory frameworks. And $90 million is investment fund where we will be actually providing blended equity for some of the distributed solar projects in the region. Uh, I think this is just the beginning, and of course, we are the key part of it. We will be looking to partner with a commercial fund manager to implement it on a day-to-day basis. So the fund manager will be actually taking the investment decisions for the facility. And the other key component is that Africa is just the start. What we are looking forward to is to roll out this facility after starting Africa is in Asia and other regions of the world. And then hopefully the other two components which have also been identified and we are designing those and probably will add those taking cue from along we are implementing the first three now and then we'll keep adding other things is the local currency protection and carbon markets. So those are the things which we will work in parallel. So this is a lot has been said. This is a picture in terms of the facility. As we mentioned, there is a global seller facility, which is basically going to provide the anchor capital to all the three components, which I just mentioned, and all of these will be managed by investment manager. And basis the success of this, we will be rolling out other facilities in other regions. This is really going to be a global facility, and that's why we are looking at rolling it out across different parts of the world with the parent vehicle probably being in some other locations and the regional facilities being located in the region so that again the decisions are taken fast and there is a real global impact which we are able to create. What we are also looking at is how do we basically make sure that there are lessons learned which are being shared across the various regions, and that's how you create a global impact. As of now, we are looking at $100 million of anchor capital, which we'll be providing for the global solar facility, out of which, as DG sir mentioned, Government of India is considering $25 million. ISA itself is providing $10 million. And Bloomberg Philanthropy and CIF have also committed between them $4 million. So we have $39 million already in pipeline, and we hope to roll it out in the next couple of quarters so that we can actually start implementing projects and as we keep adding the investors. So that's it. We'll be happy to take questions, but I think we'll probably move on to the panel first and the announcement, and then we'll be here for your questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Harsh. And before we move to the panel discussion, let's have a formal photo op of the announcement of the first pilot project of the Global Solar Facility. May I request DG Sir and Jonathan, if we can just come forward, have a formal handshake. And with this, we announce the first pilot project of the Global Solar Facility. Thank you. We'll now move to the technical panel discussion for catalyzing investments for solar across the globe. As you can see, we have a very distinguished panel today. We've got the likes of.
Since Elaine is leaving, maybe we can do a photo op.
Yeah. We'll do the photo op right now. Alan, please.
Raza, would you like to join as well?
We'll now move to the panel discussion for catalyzing investments for solar. This panel discussion would be moderated by DG Sir. We've got the likes of the Mega Group, Bloomberg Philanthropies. We've got John from Nuru Energy. We've got Santosh, who's the MD of Intellicap Advisory. And we've got Anita Ma'am, who's leading Athena Capital. So over to you.
Thank you very much, Pragya. Listen, I have a star-studded panel of our partners. And what can I ask them? This would seem, because I talk to them every day. But let me ask you, Marcus. Uh, we have been talking of uh, uh, guarantees, insurance, and so on. How do you look at it in the MEGA view? Where is it that we are going as far as investments are concerned?
Okay, well, thank you very much. And let me just start by thanking you and your team for everything that you've done and you're doing. And we were in a meeting the other day, and Alan, I think, has now left, but he made the point that this is really important work, and it really is important work. And I think that one of the conclusions I've had so far from this week here at COP has been that, the urgency is clear to everybody, but it's perhaps even understated how urgent it is that this work moves forward. And the imperative is very, very clear, but also that it just is going to take a lot of people and a lot of organizations coming together and being really well organized and integrated. So what you're doing here is exactly fitting into that need. Um, Maybe just quickly, I mean, guarantees, you talked about education. It's a pretty weird esoteric tool, frankly, in the financial toolbox. A lot of people don't really know what it is. I didn't before I got into this world. Just by way of quick explanation, I mean, essentially what it is that, and there are different types of guarantees, of course, but the guarantee that we provide are non-commercial risk guarantees. And so really what that means is that if you're an investor or developer looking at a project, and this is true, by the way, not just in developing countries, but industrial economies as well. But you look at your business plan and you sit there and you think, okay, does this make sense? Is this viable? Am I going to be able to make the kind of return that's appropriate? And you make a decision based on that whether or not to go forward. But I think in a lot of sorry, lift it up. Okay. In a lot of markets, there's also a question of the non-commercial risks, the things that could happen to you outside of what you can control, and whether those things could happen and come in and just cut the floor out from underneath your legs. And in developing economies, developing countries, where things tend to be less regulated and less structured, and there's less of a track record, people really worry about this. And that is one of, you talked about the percentage of investment that's going into the African continent. It's less than 5%, 2% maybe. It's a tiny amount, and clearly far less than is needed. But one of the reasons why, when you look at a lot of studies and sort of academic research about what is stopping investment moving forward, is because people are concerned about investors and lenders are concerned about, that the rules of the game could change once they get in there and their money is sort of at risk. So what we do is we provide guarantees that basically say, look, that won't happen. We will use our position with the host country, who's our shareholder as a multilateral, to negotiate settlements, to come in and resolve disputes if they begin to occur. And in the final instance, if we're unsuccessful in doing that, then we will come in and we'll pay a claim like an insurance agency would. But basically what we're doing is trying to guarantee good behavior in both directions, to be honest. Also that the investor will come in and be a good sort of corporate citizen in that country. And I think then the just again to pick up on what you were saying at the beginning here, Dr. Mata, um, the the rules are sort of changing, and the objectives are changing right now. I mean, we all know that energy is crucially important to create economic growth, to lift people out of poverty, to boost shared prosperity, as we say in the World Bank Group. But clean energy is also absolutely essential for many different reasons. I mean, clearly climate reasons, but also to do with cost and efficiency and so on. It's really, really important. The role of institutions like the World Bank Group, and I think Bloomberg, not to speak for you, but it's sort of changed. It used to be that the World Bank was thinking about how to, build up its war chest and put out more loans to the government, to the public sector. That is changing now, and it's all about trying to leverage the private sector. As we go from billions to trillions, it's clear that the trillions are not going to come from the World Bank and for official aid for individual countries' donor assistance. It's got to come from the private sector. And of course, it's also where the energy, the innovation, the entrepreneurialism, all of that is coming forward from there too. And in fact, it doesn't even really stop there in some ways from a financing point of view. We're a catalyst, clearly. MEGA is a catalyst. We estimate that every dollar that we provide a guarantee for translates into about $15 to $20 of investment that is coming forward. And that's really important. And that's taking a relatively small balance sheet and really optimizing the way it can be used. And so in terms of the World Bank Group and what we're trying to do across the group, using these kind of catalytic levers is really important. But I think ultimately what we're trying to do, and I think Alan touched on this, is to find a way to commoditize these transactions. And it's not just simply bringing in, commercial lenders as opposed to DFIs, as opposed to just pure grant financing. That's the sort of the chronology, the evolution. But ultimately to try to find a way to just take projects like this and take them into the capital markets and get institutional investors coming in through the bond markets, and then you're getting to the trillions. But to do that, we need to get smaller projects moving, get classes of projects moving forward. And I think that's where what you're doing with ISA, what we're trying to do with MEGA, what the World Bank Group is trying to do on the private sector side, is supporting John and trying to find 1,000 Johns, as it were, 1,000 Moors. So thank you.
That's a Marcus. Can I use your quote again and again? Finding 1,000 Johns. That's what we are looking for. Rebecca, uh, as we go around finding 1,000 Johns, uh, we are absolutely delighted and thankful to the Bloomberg Philanthropies for this partnership. It also speaks of your confidence in making this move the market. Let me ask you a larger question. What do you see as a role for philanthropies in general, not just BP, in unlocking the market in places where it is not building up?
Thank you so much, Dr. Mathur. And let me also thank this esteemed panel. I'm really honored to be here. And we're so proud of our partnership with the International Solar Alliance and our support of the new Global Solar Facility. If I may introduce my institution briefly, Bloomberg Philanthropies is a foundation whose mission is to ensure better, longer lives for the greatest number of people. We work in 150 countries around the world and 700 cities. And across our work on climate and environment, which is my focus, clean energy development and mobilizing capital for climate solutions are absolutely essential to our work. And the question, what is the role of philanthropy in doing that, is certainly one that we interrogate for ourselves every day. So, of course, there's lots of different work that we support as a foundation, lots of different types of work, but I might categorize it into two broad areas. The first is what we would consider bridge building or convening. Maybe what you might call more traditional grant making, supporting best in class data, research, capacity building, and technical assistance, both for governments and civil society organizations. We really, as much as we can, try to leverage the ability of philanthropy to pay for people to come together and make sure that research is informing policymakers, that we are bridging together public and private investors in venues such as this and more broadly COP28 and beyond. That's the first category. The second is where philanthropic dollars can serve as catalytic capital. Of course, we see this in a couple of different ways. There are blended finance mechanisms. There's also project preparation. But this is one where we really see the Global Solar Facility as the kind of investment that uses philanthropic dollars for the most possible leverage in terms of unlocking public and private investment, but then also leveraging our dollars for impact for people. I believe the Global Solar Facility has the potential to bring electricity access to millions of households in Africa, with the potential to benefit hundreds of millions of people. And this is exactly why we're here. It's our driving us, our core mission.
Thank you. Thank you, folks. I thought this was working. Yes, it is. Thank you very much, Rebecca. I am moving to John, the first of 1,000 Johns. But John, I mean, listen, we need to know more about the Nuru project because we are looking at the Nuru multiplied 1,000 times in order to make an impact. Tell us more about the project.
Yeah, just echoing gratitude to be part of this panel and part of this event, and I'll get back to it. But just ISA's catalytic support of the company is incredibly encouraging. But yeah, maybe just two big sets of numbers and then one very small number just to contextualize what we do. But Nuru means light in Swahili, so we're the light company in Eastern Congo. We build solar powered production plants, distribution infrastructure, hundreds of kilometers of distribution infrastructure, the metering, the mobile money integration. So we're a vertically integrated utility working in cities in Eastern Congo. We're currently operating the largest off-grid solar hybrid mini grid in Africa in the city of Goma. It's powering about 3,000 connections. So some big numbers from Congo. 72 million people lack access to energy right now. 26 million people are food insecure. It's the most in the world. 6 million people are displaced. It's the most in the world. About 150 meters for a solar site that we're building with support from MIGA and others. There's about 100,000 displaced people right now. So our operations are in a part of the world where there is a lot of risk, which I'll get back to in 1 minute. But we have a huge energy access opportunity in DRC, 72 million people. And this is the world's second lung and some of the most dense carbon sequestration natural through the peatlands in the Congo rainforest. So climate, energy access, DRC is a fascinating nexus. And then millions of people who are using otherwise diesel generators to power their lives and businesses. You have a commercial opportunity. Renewable energies are much cheaper. So that's a big number, 72 million in DRC. And then we come to COP and tens of billions, hundreds of billions of dollars get committed to things like the nexus of climate and energy access. So in theory, these two big numbers should meet in a place like Congo. Why don't they? It's because of risk. So Mark has described MIGA as somewhat esoteric, but the friction in getting this capital deployed in markets like DRC is 100% risk. We just closed our Series B, $72 million of financing to build 13.7 megawatt of new plants and infrastructure to serve hundreds of thousands of people in Congo. Guarantee 100% we would not have closed the round without MIGA in the deal. It wouldn't have happened. So we're hugely grateful for MIGA taking their own risk in a market like DRC, figuring out the complexity, all the different stakeholders to make these projects possible. But then my super small number, and that's one. And in reality, we're at an event like this, and we're discussing, even in our case, hundreds of millions of dollars. But for a person living in DRC who's connected to our infrastructure, all of this capital goes into what they pay. So when people talk about the kind of catalyzing support that ISA is providing, honestly, it's not for Nuru. The company is not the beneficiary, it's the people that we serve. And the cost of capital uh, punishes them. So we're giving people access who are at the nexus of all these needs. And the cost of capital is risked by investors who are afraid of a market like DRC. And this type of support directly makes this power more affordable to them. So I just want to remind us that this is such an exciting and catalytic initiative. But in the end, it's people on the ground in one of the most difficult environments in the world who are the beneficiaries of the support. So tremendously grateful for the opportunity to deploy this support in a place that needs it tremendously, and very excited to see this scale up and catalyze for hopefully the dozens of John-like, Nuru-like entities that emerge in places like the RC.
Thank you very much, John. And I again want to emphasize how delighted we are at this partnership. Santosh is our partner in expanding this facility. As we said, we would expand it to Asia and on to other geographies, Latin America, and so on. And Santosh is working with us and the World Bank and the Asian Development Bank together on looking at the Asia facility. Santosh, before we come to you, I also want to reach out to our colleague Anita. Anita and Harsh have been our very close partners in designing this facility, in structuring it. And tell me what, as Ellen said, we are not going ahead with all the bells and whistles today, but we are starting off with what we think are essentials. Tell me, what are the other tools that you think may be necessary as we go along?
Thank you, Dr. Mathur, and I'm really thrilled beyond words to be here today because one of the things that I've seen throughout my career is really the fact that demonstration speaks the loudest. And just having this project come up in DRC, that will be a huge incentivizer to move things forward. The second is innovation. And I think the combination of partners here speaks to that because often, you have one project, maybe a couple of financiers, and here we've managed to bring in many different elements, and that innovativeness and innovation in financing is key to turn the billions to trillions. In terms of other tools, one big risk, and I think Harsh alluded to it in his presentation, whenever we work in emerging markets, the currency risk is one that frightens everybody, especially large institutional investors. And that is an area where we really need to come up with a cost competitive, deep, long tenor instrument. Our colleagues in the World Bank have spoken about using carbon credits, which is usually earned in hard currency, as a mitigant to exchange risk. We also think one other way is to use some of the guarantee instruments to incentivize local banks who have local currency to come in. And that's another big force. I was really delighted this past few months ago when I was in Nairobi to hear that the pension funds and sovereign wealth funds of Africa, who collectively manage $2.3 trillion, some of them are slowly moving ahead to try and put this investment into infrastructure projects. And what we need is that from demonstration and innovation, we move to mainstreaming. And to be able to mainstream, you need the demonstration and innovation, but you also need reducing the risk to excite institutional investors to come forward. And this is what we've seen in solar in some of the countries like India, where it's really taken off, where the pension funds of Canada, almost every single one of them has anywhere between 20 to 50% stake in the renewable energy platforms in India. So mainstreaming is key, managing the risks are key. I'll stop there.
Thank you very much, Anita. I mean, I can't tell you how much we have
great.
depended on you, on Harsh, and on your other colleagues who are not here today for the structuring of the festival, the design and the structuring of the facility. And we'll continue to lean on you. Raza, Africa 50 has been an active proponent of renewables in Africa, particularly on the energy side. Uh, I, I basically want to bring to you possibility of using this facility to enhance the kinds of investments that Africa 50 can do into a newer space, decentralized solar, and would love to hear your thoughts on how that synergy could occur and how the synergy could benefit both of us.
Thank you. So my colleague Alain already talked about Africa 50 and what we do on the continent. And we're a purpose-built organization.
Mhm.
And the two words that Alain used was, speed and scale. And that's very important. Africa 50 is an organization that does not want to play small ball. And when I say small ball, that does not talk about small projects. We want to make impact on the largest number of people. And while philanthropic contributions are extremely important and can be instrumental, the problems will really be solved by commercial capital. There is no other way. Commercial capital will find its way. You don't have to go looking for it. It will find its way to the project if it's a positive IRR project.
Mhm.
Okay. So Africa 50, as Alain said, has been doing larger projects. We own a stake in the largest power plant in Nigeria. We have a couple of plants in Senegal, in Mozambique. That's very large. That's a different space. This is a space that we want to get into. The problem has been that there is a perception of risk and then there's a real risk.
Mm.
The perception of risk we can get around. We are on the ground. We can understand that sometimes the risk is overblown. There is a real risk. Often, and if you really get down to it, it's not that there's not enough projects, that there's not enough motivated people, or no, that's not it. It's the ultimate customer who does not have the ability to pay for the service that is provided, at least initially. And that's where blended finance and concessional funding can really come in. It has to be really targeted. If you have a capital structure and you have a capital structure with your debt and with your mezz debt and with your equity, and if the returns still don't make sense, this is where it can come in. And let's also, I think we talk about a lot of aspirational things at COP, but I have a private equity background, so I'll talk about it real numbers also. Okay. To the matter is, people can say whatever they want.
Uh-huh.
If they find a 15% IRR project in Spain or in India, they are not going to invest in Rwanda. Some may, it'll be small dollars. What has to happen is that the risk adjusted return of the project in Rwanda, in Congo, in Botswana has to be elevated enough where your commercial capital just flows in. And that's where targeted use of blended finance. And I think what you folks are doing is incredibly important, just being a channel for this. The targeted use of those concessional funds of blended finance will make a lot of projects that hitherto may not have been viable or bankable attractive.
Right. Riza, that is at the heart of both what you think and what we think, and we hope that together we can make it happen. There's a huge amount of learning that has already occurred in the setting up of the facility for Africa. So now let me turn to Santosh and ask him about the thinking, about the consultations that he has had about the creation of a facility, a risk facility for Asia.
Thank you, Dr. Mathur. Pleasure to be here and in a very august company. I think I'll just pick up. I'll go to your questions, sir, in a different way. The two things that I've been hearing is that the role of blended finance and the leveraging private capital. And this is the conversation we have about every time when we talk about blended finance. I think getting private capital is result of a number of things done right. It's not always one thing that you do. Is blended finance facility in isolation cannot achieve that. It's having the right kind of pipeline, having 1,000 Johns waiting for the capital, having the right kind of economics for the investors who are walking into the facility. And the third one is that having the high probability of achieving that return with risk mitigation. So when we were talking to many of the stakeholders in Asia, the first thing that came out that the overall picture that solar is kind of getting a lot of attraction and investment came out to be that it is going to a few sectors. And it was very similar in Africa also, few geography, few sectors. So we started looking at which are the sectors which have the right technology, right kind of market, but some kind of challenge in the business models and the return expectations. And that become the basis for our consultation there. That okay, is this sector right for investment that can make the private sector walk in? If the returns are not attractive, if the partners are not there, so we started looking at segments like floating solar is a big discussion point in especially the island nations, and they're talking about that. Productive use is a big issue, but we don't get that much investment. Rooftop solar, despite the success that we have in Asia, rooftop solar has not been that successful. So we started focusing on which segments can be catalyzed to attract private capital by this blended finance facility. And although I should say that I have designed a few of them for multiple kind of partners, but ISA's role, and it's not that we are working with you, but just to give you the context, the overall approach that ISA has about working with the countries, working with the partner, it does not only unlock the capital for the private sector, it creates the possibility of getting higher return, the kind of return they're looking from the sector, which had not been possible. So when you work with the sector, when you work with the countries, you bring the policy attention, you bring the pipeline setup. So for us, learning had been very simple. Focus on the segments that have high impact possibility, and that can be catalyzed first, because if we don't club them, because there are different way of unlocking those things, but for the blended finance facility, it has to be that catalytic capital makes that impact. I'll stop here.
So, Santosh, I'm going to follow up on that, but I'm going to first ask John the question and then I'm going to come back to you.
Okay.
What it clearly means is that there are some regulatory issues which are constraining the growth in those particular sectors. John, where do you see the capacity regulatory challenges to be? And the reason I ask this is because as we develop, we also need to be able to provide, through another hand, provide those kinds of supports. So, for example, if you're talking in DRC, what are the kinds of support can ISA provide to the government of the DRC?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's such a critical point. And in the DRC, the energy sector was liberalized in 2013. So it's in a way new. And then the regulator, the Independent Regulatory Authority, was appointed about 2.5 years ago. So we have an extremely immature regulatory environment and kind of a nascent liberalized energy sector. So that is, again, it's a risk, but it's also a huge opportunity for innovative models and sort of growth focused, scale focused private initiatives to try to reach electrification goals to happen. But what's needed is the experience sharing, the capacitization from entities that really understand what works in the sector. What are folks like Africa 50 going to look at on a regulatory framework to say, how does this work at scale in a market like DRC? So there's an enormous opportunity for investment in the regulation We have found that the regulator in DRC is extremely ready to find ways to catalyze growth. And so they just really want partners who can help them build that capacity.
Yeah, I'm looking in the audience. I don't see two particular people who I would have liked to see here. One is Mr. Deshdeepak Verma, who used to be the regulator in one of the Indian states and created the first regulations for solar mini grids, which have led to a large private sector investment in those markets. And the second is my colleague Oni, who developed the mini grid regulations in Nigeria and is now providing regulatory support in various countries. John, I'm going to count on you to provide inputs both to Mr. Verma and to Oni as and to open doors in DRC because we would very much like to see how we can help support the regulator. But Santosh, coming back to you, w- this obviously implies that we need regulatory support in the Asian region. What kinds of regulatory support?
I think, sir, overarchingly, if you look at the several segments, I would not only say regulatory support, the government support. Some of this, because slightly broadening it, some of the sectors require a lot of aggregation of demand
Okay.
because a lot of entrepreneurs don't operate there. It's very difficult for them to aggregate demand. It's a huge cost. And there is no guarantee that the reward would go to the entrepreneurs like a market building. So a lot of focus on sectoral market building, put the right kind of thing. The second one, I would see that majority of these kind of developers have been not very clear about the regulatory framework being certain. They're not talking specific. These rules will
But
be
the
there,
changes.
but the changes, right? So they want the stability. They want that whatever is that, because then we can plan for it. Then we can see how it affects the business model. But if it is fluid, if it is not kind of going in any direction, it's not being talked about, then it becomes very, very difficult for them to convince their investors. It's good to go to investors and saying that I see a IRR of 15%, but it's very bad to go to investors saying I don't know what my IRR would be,
Yeah.
in 2 years. So that's the second piece. Third piece, I think the solar vision for different nations in Asia
Uh-huh.
has been slightly kind of lacking nuance on these sectors. We have a broad vision that we want to kind of highlight this much of solar potential. Just for the audience, we still are talking about 4% utilization of solar potential in Asia.
Okay.
I'm not talking about the investment, but 4% of that. Now, the reason is that we don't have a very sectoral, very segment specific clarity that what is the strategy for this particular segment. So having that mini grid has been a good example. Even in India, we saw the big support to the megawatt scale, but mini grids were almost like, afterthought later there. So several countries we talked to, they're saying, okay, can you get the sectoral nuances in the policy that, okay, this is the part of that thing that gives the signal to the market and that gives the signal to investors. So, there
Okay.
are several nuances, but I don't want to go there.
Right.
Broad pictures.
I was going to ask John, but before I come to John, let me ask you, Raza. Is this a problem across multiple geographies in the countries that you operate?
So you're talking about regulatory impediments?
Yes.
I think it is, but when we think of regulatory impediments and what perhaps governments can do, I think we have to sort of leave sometimes our lens behind and look at it from a different point of view. There are legitimate interests of other parties also. One of the parties that perhaps will push back is the utility.
Mhm.
The utilities are always very concerned because utilities are putting in hundreds of millions of dollars connecting, putting the high voltage lines and then the medium voltage and distribution networks. And once they do that, they don't want to have stranded assets.
Yeah.
So one has to coexist and figure out how they don't feel threatened, because one of the biggest challenges or one of the biggest worries of a utility operator is somebody going to cherry pick
Good
customers.
point. Good.
Okay.
Yeah.
I think on what governments can do, perhaps if you will allow me, I can make one more point, okay, on a broader level. I think what governments should realize is that you have to crawl before you walk, and you have to walk before you run. Okay. If you look at the experience of places like India and Turkey, okay, you realize that history does not repeat, but it rhymes. What those countries did with a lot of foresight, a lot of these countries did was they started a little bit smaller. I was doing solar projects in India about 10 years ago, and this is even before that time. They would have a smaller project, and they would allow the investor to get a really high return.
Ah,
And nothing brings other investors in like hearing that somebody else made a 22% IRR. And then the next project is slightly lower. And then before you know it, you don't need a PPA. You have a merchant market, and people are really fighting
bidding
over
for
the
it.
last paisa.
Yes.
So I think it's important to look at what successful countries have done and try to emulate that.
So, listen, and Marcus, I'm going to follow up on that and ask you of examples of how success has built up in reducing the risks. So, greater either regulatory or government action and concomitantly lower risk.
Thank you. Well, I mean, so I completely agree with that. I mean, that's absolutely true. You need to have a conducive environment for people to come in. And I think to the point about the utilities being threatened, I mean, it is a really good point, and it's very true. And I think it's like so many things in life. When you've got potential conflict, you have to try to find a way to make it win-win, as they say, right? And I think that there are ways that there are some companies that are coming into the off-grid space with a view to being a partner to the utility, potentially having the utility take over the ownership of the asset at some point. That they come in, they and there are cases of excess power that can be perhaps pushed into the grid. It can be used to help with balancing. I mean, there are different ways in which it can be actually seen as an advantage. I think there are a lot of places where the to cherry pick the sort of the anchor customers. I mean, the anchor I mean, for example, looking at South Africa as a market, and the need to get businesses 24-hour reliable, cost-effective power, but more importantly, it's just the reliability of the power. I think is so urgent and huge that it's sort of a tidal wave that is carrying away all the other objections around the threats of being cherry picked and so on. But it's a legitimate concern. I think I think the other thing is just going back to the idea about learning and demonstration effects, how important that is. I mean, what the DRC is doing is pretty remarkable. And the question of regulatory, you know, the problem of having an uncertain regulatory environment, it's hard to overstate how how significant that is. I mean, I'm sure John would say this, and his other colleagues in the developer space, that as you're looking to bring in partners, I mean, one of the central questions is this a legitimate authorized project? I mean, could anybody come in and challenge us? Perhaps because they have a hidden agenda of wanting to try to push away these kind of competitors in a sense. And if there's not a clear regulatory environment, you have got a license that somebody could come back in and say, that shouldn't
Yeah.
have been granted,
Yeah.
this is a real problem. So I think that, where you've got an enlightened utility, an enlightened government. By the way, the other point also is that when we're talking about the IPP model, this is working at the sovereign level. We're talking to the Ministry of Finance, the Ministry of Energy, the national utility. A lot of these off-grid distributed energy projects, they're operating in a completely different space. It's the local mayor or the governor of the province who is really the sort of the final word on these sorts of projects. So I think that's where you've got an authority, uh, the governor, the mayor, the local regulator who wants to make things happen, seeing how it's done well in one place, that can be very encouraging to other places. And we talked about the need to get private investment in, and as you say quite rightly, I mean, they're looking for returns. It's a very competitive place. The countries, there's no question, countries are competing with each other to get investment capital and debt to come into their markets.
Marcus, let me welcome Mr. Deshdeepak Verma. He is the regulator who helped bring private sector capital, both private sector participation, private sector capital into the solar mini grid market. I'm going to ask him in a few moments, but while I wait for him to recover from the long walk, Rebecca, uh, Listen, Rebecca, one of the things that we have discussed a great deal here is about investments in various geographies moving forward. Uh, and what I wanted to ask you was, would the donors be interested in a multi-donor fund to promote solar? And please feel free to say, listen, I can't speak up for others.
Well, I can't speak for others, but I will. I think absolutely yes. As Raza mentioned earlier, I think the role of philanthropy we honestly see as really important at the outset. We've done our jobs well when we put ourselves out of business. We want to change.
Yes,
Yeah,
yes, yes, yes,
yeah.
yes, absolutely.
We
I
want.
look at that as ISA as well.
Well, these good partners. Yes, we want to change the system so much that philanthropy is not needed. That for investors, that our capital isn't needed to mitigate risk. That they understand what real risks there are, and that perceived risks are better understood. Um, all of which to say, we see so much interest in the philanthropic community in leveraging what dollars we can provide in blended finance mechanisms. But then for those foundations which maybe operate in more traditional grant making, certainly interest in supporting research, best in class data, and technical assistance, especially to governments and regulators in providing the kind of policy environments wherever we're working in the world, because it looks very different in every country that we work, that will enable the most investment. So I would say, Dr. Mathur, yes, I could definitely see some interest, but whatever proposal there is, I'll have to pass along to my boss.
Yeah, yeah, certainly. I mean, I'd like uh, you to take, in a sense, the lead in helping make this happen. Now, I'm I'm going to take advantage of the fact that Mr. Verma is here. He and I have had long discussions about what it takes to do regulations that promote private sector investment in solar mini grids. And I'm going to ask you, what are the key challenges that you face? Who are the, for example, you had spoken of utility pressures. You had spoken of the kinds of challenges that are there in the state governments. You talked of the challenges there are as far as risk perception in private sectors there. How do you, as a regulator, manage all of these?
Thank you. Just a brief. I used to be a regulator. I used to be in the government, so I used to be a regulator in the power sector, and we brought the first mini grid. No, it's okay. Okay. Let me. I'll have to be camera ready then. Uh, and we came out with the first mini grid microgrid regulation. I had a uh, talk yesterday, and I said that at that time I didn't know, I had not heard of mini grid and microgrid regulation, and my team had no experience in the mini grid and microgrid regulation, and we came out with a regulation. And what we did in the process is that we put all the norms of regulation upside down. And you would be surprised that in our regulation, we first time said there will be no regulation on the price, and the regulation instead would be on the quality and the time of the supply. At that time, things have changed in India. At that time, the grid, main grid people used to supply power when they did not need it, and did not supply power when they really needed it the most. That was the system. So, and the private sector, when they chipped in, and then I will come to the point that has been raised by Mr. Mathur. When the private sector came in, the solar, the perception was different. They what they did was they said, okay, even if I give you at a higher price, we will give you when you need it. You will give the way you want it, and we'll give the quality that you need it. So now coming to, and that is why they succeeded in spite of very high price. In fact, 3 4 times. But consumer is not crazy. Consumer knows what to do and what not to do. So one is that I want to say in the context of what Mr. Mathur said, that if the solar is expanding so greatly, don't think that it is only because of the support of the government or the government's policy. Because the solar itself inherently is very, very viable. The concept is very viable because have you heard of any project where the input cost is free, where the transmission is free almost, and you have the huge market available with you? So it's a very, very viable project. Now, to the investors, I have been saying this, that you have to look at this sector very differently. Your normal cost benefit analysis, your risk assessments will have to be changed in this case, because this is a project, and I'm talking of the days when I was there. That was the price used to be. I have myself approved a price of 15 rupees to some of the generators, but today the price has gone down to 2.50. But when the price goes down, the viability comes even more. The challenges and the risks that you have is, which I've been emphasizing, that you have to integrate it with the main grid. The governments have to take a call on that, that they have to integrate it the main grid. And eventually, I'm telling you, this will happen. As on date, people, you see, because big and large is something which fascinates you. It intimidates you also. Big project, big, the mini grids are small, but they are making the valuable change in the lives of people at various places. And therefore, it has that inherent strength. It needs to be supported. And when it is supported, eventually it will come. And now, in fact, we are midway. We have already reached that stage. So it will come. I am not a finance expert, so I don't know what kind of risk analysis and what kind of the benchmarking and what kind of analysis and you are doing in this sector. But my only two brief points is that the sector is inherently viable sector. So it has got to succeed. It will succeed. And there are several areas in which this support is required. I think you were mentioning about the R&D, because in the power sector, in terms of the solar, in terms of the batteries, in terms of the transmission, in terms of its harmonization with the main grid, lot of support is required. The other kind of support which Mr. Mathur's organization is doing is the advocacy. Because in the governments, people, when you go to this, maybe when I was in the government, I would have probably treated it this way also, that we are talking about 500 megawatts and 1000 megawatts uh, plants, big plants, and you are talking of, in fact, even bigger. And we are talking of a small mini grids. So they think that it's not very important, but it is very important. I've said it yesterday. The sun is a diversified source of energy. The solution also will therefore have to be a diversified solution. Only a diversified solution in this case will succeed. That is the mantra for any country which has income disparities, which have low resources, and therefore I think ISA's focus on Africa, the sub-Saharan Africa, is great, and I feel that solar as a generator, standalone and through the mini grids, has a great future. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Uh, uh, have we run out of time? Okay, good. So let me ask if there are any questions. I'd like you to identify yourself and also, if possible, identify the person in the panel, excluding me. I don't know anything. Who could answer those questions? If not, yeah, yes, Harsh.
Actually, could I request Elvira? Yes. Your Elvira runs finance in Washington, one of the largest blended finance institutions globally. So yeah, so role of blended finance. Your comments.
Hello, everybody. So Elvira Lefting from Finds in Motion. My question is, and I hope this doesn't end now on a gloomy side, but what do you see as the biggest risks, and what are your biggest concerns to actually the viability of this project? We all hope it will succeed, but what are the problems you see, the concerns you have? Because you all come from diverse perspectives, and I think that's very good to understand to make it successful. Thank you.
Reza, and then to you, John, because you are the three people who actually do the investment and run the project.
So yeah, no, that's crucial. I think let me just think about that. I mean, so firstly, I guess we're in a really difficult moment right now anyway, which is certainly not helping. I mean, we've still got the after effects of COVID and the disruptions that came from the whole pandemic on economies, but on people's lives and so on. We've got a very difficult interest rate environment. We've got inflation. We've got debt problems at the sovereign level. Um, we've got supply chain problems in the solar industry. I mean, there are a lot of headwinds. Um, at the same time, there's also, I think, a tremendous sense of urgency. I mean, I've been in the development business my entire career, really, and so there's always been that sense of urgency. But somehow it's really, it seems to be, as enhanced at the moment more than I've ever seen it. A real sense of just almost desperate urgency to move things forward. Um, I think maybe Alan spoke about it a little bit when he started, that the need for perfection. And it's a really complicated landscape when we're looking at potential projects, from any one of us, from our different positions as stakeholders. I mean, it's really hard to make sense of these things sometimes. And while we all know we need clean energy, it has to be at the same time a sort of a productive project. And there are some projects which aren't, that come in at the expense of the people and of the economy, of the system, of the grid, and so on. So we have to be careful that we're launching things that are going to be helpful. And I think that we've all got sort of investment committees and boards that we have to take things forward. And we are looking across so many different metrics now, all of which individually make a lot of sense. Environmental and social issues, with so many different types of things, I guess, without getting into them perhaps. But we can layer a lot of different filters onto one project as it comes through the pipeline. And the perfect can be the enemy of the good. And that, I think, can be a problem. I think that we have to find a way in which it's responsibly and without blowing ourselves up or blowing up our own balance sheets. How do we just let go and let more things come through and be open to the fact that there are going to be things that fail, and that's fine. In a sense, to use a sort of a soccer analogy, you know, rather than winning 1-0, better to win 10-6 or something, but let's just get more things going forward. So I think that's the biggest risk that I see.
So I completely agree with what you said, so I won't repeat that. But I think the question is excellent. It's a very deep question, and one has to almost sort of divide the question into two parts. Okay, are we talking about the success of the project or success of the sector? So that's two different things. The project is successful from the get-go because, as John said, that one customer who is getting power, that is, who was not getting power before, I mean, that's success. You have people who are getting a service that they would not be getting. So I'm less worried about success at the project level. I'm more worried about success at scale, at the sector level, because the reality is that when people bring capital into the continent, they make huge announcements. They don't make huge announcements when they don't bring capital into the continent. And that's really the big problem. You can have one project get funded, people are aspirational, people will put money in, hope triumphs over reality, and you do the project. The thing is, if the returns are not there, if people lose money, if there is issues, the problem is future investments will not come in. So the key thing is to structure things in a way where this happens at scale. So figure out what is the underlying problem and ensure that large sums of capital. So we've talked about, people have talked about Canadian pension funds, people have talked about those folks write very large checks. Maybe 30 years ago, they were not investing in India. Now they are, because there's an ability. Those people don't get out of bed for less than, I don't know, 300-400 million dollars. That's really the source of capital that one has to be eventually attracting, and that's why there has to be a track record of incrementally more attractive projects being put into place. So I think that's really, I'm trying to put the risk that you have pointed out and saying, okay, how does one kind of get around that risk and make it into a opportunity?
Yeah, excellent question. I think perhaps it's a surprising answer and it's unrelated in some ways to the key themes of this panel. But to me, the biggest risk by far for the company is human capital. So we're working in an environment where there's just a collapsed education system, top 10 birth rates in the world, population bomb. Getting the people that run these projects on the ground is the biggest risk we face. It's also the biggest opportunity for the company. I really see us as unlocking human capital as much as anything else. But for people that are looking at the philanthropic side, I was talking with Santosh before, what incredibly talented Congolese entrepreneur, another John like guy in Congo, has $200,000 a year when they're starting the company to hire a globally qualified CFO. They don't have it. So the legibility on project returns is not there, even if fundamentally the project is sound. So being able to equip really skilled entrepreneurs with the right team to allow them to unlock their potential and unlock the market is going to be critical. I don't see enough technical assistance going into companies to equip key team members to allow these projects to be viable, for the capital to really flow on the ground in places like DRC with entrepreneurs who don't have my accent or my skin color. I think maybe the last quick one, I've had to evacuate 4 times. I live in Congo with my family, volcano, rebels, multiple times. We've had people, it's just been a very exciting journey in Eastern Congo running these projects. The darkest days I've ever had running the company are dealing with investors. So, not the investors that we have now. I love our investors, but um, perfect being the enemy of great. We're building something that works and it can work at scale, but it doesn't look exactly like the project we did in Kenya. It's so difficult to find investors who get it and are willing to move fast. And I just want to say one more plug for ISA. Incredibly efficient team, understood the deal, understood the company, moved in the transaction so efficiently. We need 1,000 Johns, maybe we need 1,000 ISAs, and I think just a lot of support for this initiative.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, John. Thank you, Marcus. Thank you, Rebecca. Thank you, Santosh. Thank you, Anita. Thank you, Raza. Thank you, Mr. Verma. And thanks to all of you for coming over. Thanks for that wonderful question. You see how people got involved in it. It's obviously something that people think about on a daily basis. With that, let me thank you all for being here, and especially for this new initiative that we have launched. Thank you all very, very much.
Also, I think I'll just pick up on what Santosh and John just said. We have another session on entrepreneurship where we are looking at identifying solar startups. It's going to start at 12:30. I know it's been a hectic panel, but we're looking at creating a bankable pipeline of projects. We've done it for Africa. We'll be doing it for APAC. But thank you again for being here today, and we hope to see you in the next session also. Thank you.